Hi, everybody. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. A boatload of interesting stuff to talk about today. We'll talk about Governor Walker's proposed budget ideas, especially his idea to do away with residency requirements for public workers. We'll talk about the Derek Williams inquest and whether police officers should be held responsible for someone dying while in their custody. And we'll talk about one of the latest ideas being talked about all around the country when it comes to gun control, requiring gun owners to have gun insurance. Let me introduce everybody. Longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is Governor Walker's proposed budget. It lowers some tax rates, calls for more spending on the University of Wisconsin system, more school choice, bigger freeways in Milwaukee. But the thing that is generating the most discussion is his proposal to do away with any requirement that any municipality in Wisconsin has that requires workers to live in that community if they work there. So Milwaukee police officers, Milwaukee firefighters, teachers, they would no longer have to live in the city of Milwaukee. This has Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett freaked out. He hates the idea. A good idea, a bad idea? What do you think?
Well, I've long opposed any effort to eliminate the residency requirement for the city of Milwaukee simply because I think you've got too many folk who are poised to leave the city. That in and of itself would argue that the impact of eliminating residency requirements for the city and maybe even for the county is going to have a devastating effect on this community because we don't have a strong middle class base to support this community. And if much of our middle class opts to leave, then I think you're going to see an awful lot of pressure placed on the community to make up the difference. Folks leave, property values go down. That puts us in a bind with having to make up for that lost revenue. That means they look for some more creative ways. That means fees jump up. Nonprofits end up having to pay more of these pilots or payments in lieu of taxes. I just think it should have been left to local communities to make that decision, and if they want to maintain residency, then so be it. The flip to that, though, is that you have so many folk, particularly the situation with MPS, where we're not going to get 700 teachers out of the city of Milwaukee alone this year. And if we're going to get high quality teachers, we need to cast a broad net. And fortunately for us, it may spur us to look more at some pipeline building within the city, but I also think in the short run, we're just not going to get them, and we're going to have to open up those job opportunities to people who live outside the city of Milwaukee.
Denise, does this help MPS get high-quality teachers? Does it help the Milwaukee Fire Department get high-quality firefighters?
Well, MPS is already doing a couple of things to broaden that net, even as it comes to residency. The board passed a resolution last year that opens the window wider, gives folks up to 3 years in those hard-to-fill areas for new teachers. As Gerard said, there's 700 teachers the district is trying to hire. You're not going to find all of them here. How do you find a way to give people the opportunity to kind of see what the city's like while they still might be living in suburban communities, or in some cases with the new teachers, because of the student loan debt they have, they may be living with mom and dad, and so they're not ready to live on their own. And the district has been very aggressive in terms of broadening the net, not just looking at who's in the city, but going actually even to Puerto Rico to try to find bilingual teachers, which is an area of high need. I think it's a real challenge about how we define better. I think what cities look for are people who are committed to the work that needs to be done, whether that's a firefighter or a teacher or a police officer. Are these individuals who have a commitment? Opening up and broadening the opportunities for where people can live does not necessarily mean you're going to get people who are more committed to the work that needs to be done.
What does it say, Kevin, about a city if you're the mayor of the city and you say, oh, I'm worried that everybody's going to move out unless we can force them to live here?
It's saying that the mayor sells his own city short. if you're that worried that the floodgates will be opened if residency is eliminated and everybody will run for the city limits, well, then I think it's incumbent upon you and other city leaders to do your darndest, to do your best to make the city more attractive so that more people won't leave and that more people that did leave may rethink and come back in. I think you're going to, this will help MPS. This will help the city's fire department. This will help the city's police department. You remove that residency requirement and you'll have open up a whole new pool of applicants who never thought of working for the city of Milwaukee because of that residency requirement. Now they will, but to say, as the mayor has said in the past, that this will turn the city of Milwaukee into Detroit, I think is ludicrous, and it sells the city short. But my goodness, it will not be the end of the world here in the city of Milwaukee. And the last time I checked, this was America. I understand this is a term of employment, but you should be able to live where you want to live in this great country.
Should the city be able to require you to live within the city limits?
Well, as you know, I've said on this show in the past, I don't particularly like residency requirements. I think you owe your employer a day's work and good work, but they shouldn't have control over your private life. But I'll tell you, some people who should be required to live in the city. I don't like it for most public employees, but I certainly like it for fire and police. And there's no shortage of applicants within the city for the fire and police department. But the idea of having people from outside the city occupying the city in these public safety positions, I think it's kind of frightening. We were going to talk in a little bit about some police officers that live in this city and are on the force who we're not very proud of some of their work anyway. If you have people who are from an entirely different community, people who don't know this city, we've had problems with the fire department before. When people are calling the fire department for help and they show up at some residence, don't want to go in. Because they're afraid of the community. They're afraid of who lives there. They're afraid of Milwaukee, basically. And both the police department and fire department have had problems with hiring and being forced by courts to hire more African Americans, to have a more diverse department. The other real thing that really bothers me, though, what the heck does this have to do with the budget of the state of Wisconsin? It has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with it at all, except Governor Walker likes to kick Tom Barrett in the teeth. He, was supported by the fire department and the fire department union and the police union, and he's paying them off. He's eliminated collective bargaining for all other public employees, except he wants to put into his budget one of the things the fire department union and the police union tries to negotiate.
I think there's something to be said about that.
He's stepping into these negotiations.
I think there's something to be said about that because in previous budget discussions, one of the key issues is that we should keep policy out of the budget. This is clearly policy, but that will not prevent legislation from being drafted, and politically, this almost passed in the last session. Mm-hmm. If recollection serves correctly, it was a Republican, State Senator Glenn Grothman, that really killed this in the state Senate. I don't think this is a slam dunk. Maybe in the Assembly, but not so in the Senate, where if you get a few Republicans to flip, this may not pass, but it has a pretty good chance.
Yeah, but some of those people out in the states should be worried about the state stepping into their communities and local control in their communities.
Right, because there are 127 communities, units of government that have this residency piece. While we're talking about Milwaukee, the impact is really much greater than what happens in Milwaukee.
That's where the hand may have been overplayed, in that there are representatives, especially over on the Senate side, that may not see the wisdom in the bill and will stall it.
All right, next topic. An inquest into the Derek Williams case in Milwaukee reached a verdict that the 3 main officers involved in the case should be charged and held responsible for the fact that he died gasping for breath in the back of a squad car. It's only advisory, and if they are charged, the prosecutor has said he would only charge them with misdemeanors. Should these officers lose their jobs or their reputations because a robbery suspect died after he was chased down, pinned down, and handcuffed? Kevin.
No, but let me just preface my remarks by saying no one should ever perish while in the custody of a police officer or officers. It's tragic, and I think everyone connected inside and related to the department outside feels absolutely horrible about what happened. But keep in mind now that, and I've talked to police officers who tell me that more often than not, you will have someone taken into custody and will fake an injury, will absolutely fake it, and they don't know if it's for real or not. And when they decided in this case that it was not fake, I think they did everything they possibly could to help save that young man. Remember, before the Journal-Sentinel got the video to be released to the public, and it went visceral, it became intense in the community. You had all the investigations, including internally, the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office, the Fire and Police Commission, say that these officers did nothing wrong. I think that it's really going to be a tough decision now on the part of the special prosecutor, former Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Frankie, to decide if this should go any further. You have conflicting evidence, conflicting testimony. You had testimony that was not subject to cross-examination, and unless you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed, that's a different standard. The jury in this case, and I don't fault them, I respect them, they were there every single day and heard every single bit of testimony, but they were looking at a standard of, is there probable cause that a crime was committed? That's different from, guilty by, by reasonable doubt. There's no reasonable doubt. So the judge here is going to have to decide, will there be convictions? And if he moves forward, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to come up with convictions in this case.
Denise, is a special prosecutor in this case under a great deal of public pressure to charge them with something?
I don't think so. I think the whole system itself is under a great deal of pressure because there are many places where this case could have been looked at differently and it was not. And it started with the medical examiner's office, where the medical examiner never actually looked at any of the reports but talked to police officers. The medical examiner's office was aware that there was a videotape of what happened the night this young man lost his life, and they never looked at that. There have been mistakes along the way throughout the examination of this particular case. It's a difficult situation because we want our police officers to be able to use, in many ways, great discretion when making decisions about who they arrest, what they arrest them for, the circumstances under which sometimes force is used to seduce suspects. We want them to have that kind of discretion. There's an implicit amount of trust in being a police officer. On the other hand, there's also an incredible amount of responsibility. And part of that responsibility is, and from police officers who I know and who I've talked to, it is a real pain when they feel like somebody's faking it. But I've not talked to a police officer who I know who says they don't err on the side of saying, the guy's faking it, I'll take the chance that he's faking it and call for assistance and support and let someone else who's trained in that area make that decision about whether or not someone's faking it. What happened is unfortunate at every single level. We have a 22-year-old young man who lost his life. We have the police department itself that yet has another incident that happens where there's a question about police responsibility and their responsiveness to suspects. It shouldn't make any difference whether this gentleman was a robbery suspect or, quite frankly, Mother Teresa. He was somebody who was in police custody and care. He could not do anything on his own. He told them he was having a problem, and we now clearly know appropriate action wasn't taken to make sure that that was resolved.
You know, that was such a troubling video to watch, and when you watched it the first time, you did think to yourself, my God, how could they not have done something to help this guy? But then, as Kevin points out, don't you think that they do see this probably all the time?
They
People
do,
faking
but
stuff?
that should not alleviate them of the responsibility of exercising really good judgment, all the more because of the responsibility that they have and because of thinking about what the ultimate consequence could be. And that's what happened. A life was lost that didn't need to be lost. I think there really was so much bad judgment that was exercised in all of this that there needs to be some kind of penalty for the consequence. The sad part about it is that I don't think they're going to be able to prove criminal intent, and that's the standard by which now the courts are going to have to deal with it. I do think they're going to be charged because the DA understands that living in this community, people are in need of having some faith in the system overall restored, but more particularly in the police department. I think it really, once you see that video, it shatters your confidence in the ability of the police to exercise good judgment, particularly when it comes to young African-American or Latino men.
But do the officers deserve to lose their jobs and their careers?
Well, that would be up to a full-fledged trial to determine. You know, as everyone has said, this is just looking at whether there's even probable charge for them to be charged with anything. And, you know, the evidence on two sides wasn't presented, really, although Frankie in his summation did a good job of summarizing the arguments on both sides. But it was kind of amazing to me that this was looked at as such a historic event that you know one of these inquests would actually charge a police officer, because in fact historically they have not, and they have not in some even terribly egregious cases over the years. And the district attorney in fact stopped using inquests because he said you couldn't get an inquest jury to charge a police officer, especially when the police officer was white and the defendant was a black man in the black community with perhaps a criminal record. This particular guy didn't have any criminal record. But that obviously there is change going on in this community. There has been so many, a series of events in fairly recent history. Just the Frank Jude case, we actually had a all-white jury declare that the police officers in that instance were acquitted. They were not guilty, which when they end up going to federal trial, some of them went to prison for a long time. So the fact that an inquest jury, even if it's only for a misdemeanor, it's kind of amazing that this is a historic misdemeanor that they might be charged with.
The punishment for those misdemeanors isn't
but
lean
no longer is the police department automatically allowed to get by with anything.
All right, next topic. An interesting proposal is being floated in various parts of the country having to do with gun control. It would require gun owners to buy gun insurance, and if the gun was used in a shooting, it's possible then that the victim or survivors could go after the insurance company for damages. Now, is that a whacked out idea, Gerard, or does that make some sense?
Well, I don't own a gun, so I doubt that I'll ever be in a position where I'll need to go out and buy gun insurance. But I don't know what problem it solves. If someone is wrongfully shot with a gun and there's a civil lawsuit that takes place, they can go after whatever that person has. To require insurance, everyone to have insurance, I think that's just another effort to deter people from owning guns.
Is it another thing to stop somebody from their constitutional right to have a gun?
I believe it is. I agree with you. It is another effort to deter gun ownership, and to suggest otherwise would be humorous. It is turning a right into a privilege by essentially imposing a means test on gun ownership. And the proposal in the state of New York, where it would be mandatory to take out $1 million policy, would cost a gun owner $1,500 to $2,000. So again, you are turning a right into privilege, and I don't think that it solves anything. It does nothing to reduce gun violence, and I think the better approach would not be mandatory insurance, but voluntary insurance. And some gun groups have actually implemented policies for people who want to take them out in case they are in a situation where they fire a gun in the act of self-protection. But those are voluntary instances. I don't believe that mandatory is the way to go.
Some national observers think this idea has legs, though.
Well, it's kind of a backdoor approach to try to reduce the number of deadly weapons in our society. Frankly, I like the front door approach. We can ban, those high capacity magazines. We can ban military assault weapons for our streets that should only be on battlefields. And we could get universal background checks. It would be, all three of those things would be much more effective than this. And it seems like a lot of people are saying, well, we're never going to have the politicians have enough guts to, really ban any form of even ridiculous things that we have out in the public. And so therefore we'll look for some of these, off-brand ways to try to just reduce the number of guns in our society. I say go for what every sensible person except the NRA leadership knows would be much more effective, and get military and high capacity magazines that'll wipe out tens and hundreds of people, ban those from our streets. And the Second Amendment is perfectly alive and well, because we can always, restrict rights when they don't make any sense at all.
Are you happy with how Obama keeps pushing this idea, or do you think he's going to back down?
Well, I don't think he's going to back down, because it's what he's doing is reflecting what poll after poll after poll tells us is what people in this country want. We've seen poll after poll that shows virtually, 98% of the people, virtually all gun owners, who say, we don't have a problem with mandatory background checks. We think that's a good thing for us to do, to be able to make sure that people who have mental health issues, people who have restraining orders, in the case of domestic violence, for example, that there are no loopholes that allow them to buy guns. Joel is right in that this is a backdoor way to do something. What we're trying to do is to fix a way to address issues and things that people do that are stupid with their weapons. What we ought to do is fix it on the front end. In addition to mandatory background checks, making sure that there are certain individuals where we close the loopholes so you can't buy a gun out of the back of a truck just after you've been released from jail because you've beaten up your wife or girlfriend. We also need to make sure that as part of this permitting process, particularly for concealed carry, that there are actually strenuous and all-encompassing training sessions that people have to go through. As it is with so many things in life, people make dumb mistakes when they aren't properly trained to know what the right ones are. Quite frankly, if I owned a gun, I'd have insurance like that, just the same way I have insurance when I own a car. Because sometimes something stupid will happen.
But driving a car, it can't. It's
I'm not equating it to a right, Kevin. What I am doing is
driving a car.
What I am equating it to is that
right.
Smart people, when they know that they're in a situation where something bad could happen, that could cost them personally, do something responsible about it, and that's what the insurance does.
Can I quickly just say on this side of the studio that all the things you two addressed, I don't think would do anything to reduce gun violence.
I know, you said that about 30 times.
It had to be said.
You said
all
it
those
about 30
front-end
times.
measures wouldn't help at all.
All right.
But they don't hurt either, Kevin. They don't hurt.
Illinois' reputation took another hit this week as one of its favorite sons literally pled guilty to using hundreds of thousands of dollars of other people's money for his own personal purposes. The details that the prosecutors made public made for some pretty amazing reading. And Rick Horowitz was definitely one of those readers. Rick.
Well, I know one thing for sure. It would have made a hell of a yard sale. Jesse Jackson Jr.'s stuff, mounted elk heads and mink capes, Bruce Lee memorabilia and a guitar that once belonged to Eddie Van Halen, porcelain collectibles and flat-screen TVs. And that's not even counting the luxury vacations and the high-priced meals and, the stuff that you can't give back. Did I mention that the money that paid for Jesse Jackson Jr.'s lavish lifestyle didn't actually belong to Jesse Jackson Jr.? Or more precisely, that the money, and we're talking $750,000 here, that it came from campaign funds that were supposed to be used, for campaigns, not for a nonstop shopping spree. Here's what I keep remembering. Jesse Jackson Sr. may have had the blood, literally the blood, of Martin Luther King on his shirt. And his son is spending thousands on one of Michael Jackson's hats? Really? Thousands that aren't even his to spend? Oh, and thousands more for some Dr. King memorabilia, too. Plus a football signed by 2 former presidents. So maybe he does have a sense of history. Which, of course, doesn't explain the $43,000 gold-plated Rolex. Really? For a wristwatch? That's almost as much as Robert Menendez. He's a senator from the great state of New Jersey. That's almost as much as Mr. Menendez finally decided to pay to reimburse his wealthy Florida doctor pal for the trips on the doc's private jet and the vacations at the doc's private villa in the Caribbean. This is while he was busy pushing the doc's business interest in the Senate. He reimbursed him for $58,000. Hey, he forgot. Could have slipped anybody's mind, right? And they say people don't trust politicians. Can't imagine why. Where were we? Oh, right, Junior. Look, I'm no psychologist. I have no idea whether the famous sons of famous fathers are more likely to be screw-ups or whether we're just more likely to hear about them when they go wrong. What I do know, though, this whole political dynasty thing is highly overrated. There's not much evidence that the quality of a family's public service improves with successive generations. So what time is it on Jesse Jackson Jr.'s Rolex? Time for prison.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.